30 days after my family cut me off. My phone finally lit up, but not with concern. It was a demand for money. It sent out on unsync unp. Like I was some malfunctioning ATM they were rebooting. And the best part, my mother didn't even realize I'd stopped paying their mortgage. She just panicked when the auto transfer didn't hit. I stared at her message, waiting to feel anger, heartbreak, anything. But all I felt was clarity. A cold, sharp kind of clarity that changes the direction of a man's life. So I sent 8 words that ended everything. What happened next wasn't a reaction. It was a reveal. I grew up believing capability was a virtue, something admirable, something that protected you. But somewhere along the way, my family twisted it into something else entirely. In the Bennett household, competence wasn't a strength. It was a trapdoor I didn't notice until it opened beneath me. My name is Ethan Bennett, eldest son, unofficial problem solver, and default adult long before I was old enough to vote. If you ask people who knew me back then, they'd say I was the stable one, the kid who always remembered his homework, who fixed the Wi-Fi when it broke, who kept his cool when everyone else spiraled. They'd say I was disciplined, focused, mature beyond my years. What they wouldn't see was how early I learned to disappear into responsibility. My family had its own gravitational pull. My father, Raymond, was a man who lived in a perpetual state of almost successful, almost promoted, almost able to hold things together. He carried a quiet shame about the life he never achieved, the kind of shame that turns ambition sour. My mother, Elise, was his perfect counterpart, organized, decisive, and fiercely protective of the family's image. She ran the household like it was a PR campaign, carefully curated so no one ever saw the cracks. And then there was Noah, my younger brother by 3 years. But in emotional years, he never made it past 14. Noah was charming in that reckless way that makes people root for him. He was loud where I was quiet, chaotic where I was structured. Yet somehow, he always landed safely, cushioned by my parents' excuses and second chances. They called him sensitive, creative, a free spirit. But beneath those poetic labels, he was simply undisciplined, unreliable, the kind of person who created storms and then expected others to clean up the debris. You can probably guess who did the cleaning. The family dynamic formed early. When Noah forgot his science project, I stayed up with him to finish it. When he lost his keys or crashed his bike, I was the one my parents called. Ethan will handle it. That was their mantra, confidence or complacency. I still don't know which. My father used to look at me with a mixture of pride and expectation. The way an investor watches a dependable asset. You've always been solid. He'd say, I don't worry about you. At the time, it felt like affection. Now I know better. Parents should worry about their children, not because they're weak, but because they care. What my father really meant was, you're self-sustaining. You don't need anything from us. And because you don't need, we don't have to give. Meanwhile, Noah was a constant emergency, financial, emotional, academic, and emergencies get attention. Emergencies get resources. Emergencies get love disguised as rescue. Every time he stumbled, they swooped in. Every time he failed, they rationalized it. Every time he broke something, his phone, a promise, himself, they fixed it with my parents' time and my money. I didn't recognize the imbalance growing between us. I mistook being needed for being valued. But the truth was simpler and much uglier. Noah was cherished because he was fragile. I was used because I wasn't. That realization didn't hit me all at once. It built slowly, like sediment collecting at the bottom of a river. When I graduated top of my class in pharmacy school, my parents congratulated me over the phone quickly. Between dealing with one of Noah's latest emergencies, when I paid off my first student loan, they didn't notice. When I bought them the upgraded medical insurance they'd been avoiding, they thanked me vaguely, distracted, as if I'd fixed a leaky faucet. But when Noah launched a doomed wellness drink startup, they threw him a party. When he needed help covering his credit card debt, my father emptied his savings. When he failed out of community college for the 3rd time, My mother cried for days. There was only one person in my family who truly saw me, my grandfather. Walter. He was the only one who didn't treat me like the household's living generator. When I was a kid, he'd sit with me on the back porch, the air thick with pine and the sound of distant traffic. And he'd say, "You don't have to earn your place. Kiddo, you already belong." He'd tell me that competence was a gift, but not one meant to be harvested by everyone else. "You're allowed to need things too," he said once. It was the first time anyone had ever told me that. But needing something from my parents always felt like asking the ocean for a glass of water. You know it's there, but you also know you won't get it. The older I got, the clearer the roles became. My mother turned every crisis into a family emergency briefing, with me cast as the responsible adult and Noah as the heartbroken victim. "He's just trying to find himself," she'd say. "You know how hard the world is on boys like him. Boys like him. Boys who never learned consequences. Boys who expected applause for effort and forgiveness for failure." Meanwhile, I was expected to be the ballast, keeping the ship steady even if it meant sinking. And then came the moment that cemented everything. I remember sitting at the dinner table 2 years before the lawyers' meeting. My parents huddled over financial paperwork. Noah had just accidentally invested several $1,000s into a crypto scheme that evaporated overnight. My mother was wringing her hands. My father was calculating solutions he didn't have. Finally, my mother said, "Maybe Ethan can help. Just this once." Just this once. As if I hadn't quietly paid for countless just this onces. I covered the debt. I didn't think twice. But Noah didn't thank me. He slapped me on the back and said, "You're lucky you're good with money." Man, lucky. As if my 70-hour work weeks, my student loan payments, my sacrifices were luck. But the deepest cut, the one I didn't notice, but should have, was what my father said afterward. "You really saved us tonight. Son, Noah's got a good heart. But you're built for responsibility. Built for responsibility. Like a tool. Like furniture. Like infrastructure." I never forgot my grandfather's words. But by then he was gone. And the people left behind didn't see me as a person with needs. They saw me as an economic ecosystem designed to house their failures. Over time, the pattern became mathematical. Predictable. Every promotion I earned became another justification for them to lean harder. Every bonus I received became a gift they had already mentally spent. Every new achievement meant less family support, not more. The family formula was brutally simple. Ethan provides. Noah consumes. Everyone else rationalizes. And in that equation, I learned the most dangerous lesson of my life. When you're the strong one long enough, people stop treating you like you're human. Pressure doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps. It accumulates. It disguises itself as duty until you don't recognize the difference between helping and being harvested. For me, the tightening began with small pulls on the line. It started when my father called one night. His voice unusually casual. "Hey, Ethan, your brother's car broke down. He needs a little help covering the repairs. Just until he gets back on his feet." Noah had never been on his feet. I wired $600 the next morning without thinking. I told myself it was the right thing to do. That family stepped up. That stability was something you gave, not something you received. But the second pull came a week later, this time from my mother. "Elise," I said, pressing the phone against my shoulder as I double-checked a prescription. "Is everything okay? Your father's blood pressure medication wasn't covered this month," she said, avoiding the question. "He feels terrible about it. But we thought, since you have the better insurance, you want me to add him to my plan?" "Well," she hesitated, "you know how expensive healthcare is. And Noah's going through a rough patch. We're all just trying to survive." Survive. The words scraped across my nerves like metal. But I added them to my plan. $200 a month. Then 3. Then 5. Like everything else. It was temporary. Temporary in the way people call an infection a scratch right before it spreads. After that, things escalated quickly. My parents developed a remarkable ability to call whenever I was busiest during shifts. Meetings, commutes, They'd start with small talk that lasted 90 seconds, followed by a direct pipeline to my bank account. Ethan, the heating bill is ridiculous this winter. Ethan, your brother's moving into a new place. Ethan, the dishwasher stopped working. The pattern wasn't random. It was a slow privatization of my life, every paycheck, every minute, every ounce of energy redirected toward keeping them afloat. It didn't matter how hard I worked or how tight my own budget became. My parents reacted to my success as if it increased my obligation. Not once did they ask if I was okay. Not once did they ask if I needed anything. Not once did they ask permission. And then came the refinance. A year and a half before the lawyer's meeting. My father announced it like he was giving me good news. We refinanced the house, he said, sounding proud. Was something wrong with the old loan, I asked? No. This will lower the monthly payments. It's a win. But it wasn't a win. It freed up cash. Cash they immediately funneled into Noah's newest big, break a drone photography business that crashed faster than the drones did. I didn't know the amount yet. Not then. I didn't know how deep they were digging the hole I would eventually be shoved into. But I knew enough to feel the shift. The house was no longer just a home. It was a financial structure tied directly to my labor. Their comfort was built on my exhaustion. The third tightening came in the form of expectations not spoken, but assumed. When I worked late, they acted confused. When I couldn't make a family dinner, they acted wounded. When I didn't instantly respond to a request for money, they acted abandoned. My mother became the emotional anchor. You're the stable one. Ethan, she'd say, her voice soft and strategic. We rely on you. The sentence masqueraded as love, but it was strategy. She didn't want a son, she wanted a support system. My father became the voice of morality. Family sacrifices. He'd say, isn't that what your grandfather taught you? He weaponized the one person who ever truly saw me. And Noah became the black hole pulling everyone else's gravity. He started showing up to family gatherings with new gadgets, new jackets, new tattoos, business expenses. He'd laugh. Meanwhile, I was drinking gas station coffee and patching holes in shoes I couldn't afford to replace. It wasn't that I couldn't say no. It was that I had been trained not to. Every favor was framed as fragile. Every need sounded urgent. Every request carried guilt like static electricity. And the more I gave, the more they took. Because that's the nature of takers, they interpret generosity as infinite supply. Then came the moral line. A moment so subtle, most people wouldn't even notice its violation. It was a Wednesday night around 9 p.m. I had just come off a double shift, still wearing my work scrubs, still smelling faintly of disinfectant and fatigue. My father called, and for once, I let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, he texted, "Call me now. It's about Noah." My stomach tightened. I sat in the dark, in the front seat of my car, staring at those words. I knew what about Noah meant. Another mess. Another bailout. Another crisis disguised as compassion. When I called, my father skipped greetings. "Noah's being sued," he said flatly. "He needs legal fees." "How much?" "A few thousand. Maybe more." He's panicking. And why is this my problem? There was a beat of stunned silence. And then my father's voice shifted, stern, disappointed, paternal in the worst way. "Because we raised you to be responsible. You don't turn your back on family." Responsible. There it was again. The invisible contract. I closed my eyes and felt something inside me harden. A boundary was crossed that night, not the financial one, the moral one. They hadn't just assumed I would carry Noah's mistakes. They believed it was my duty. For the first time, I didn't immediately say yes, but I didn't say no either. I sat there in the dark, the seatbelt digging into my hip, and realized something chilling. My silence was the only permission they needed. They had spent years tightening the strings around me until my life wasn't entirely my own. I wasn't the son anymore. I was the solution, the structure, the bailout fund. I wasn't family. I was infrastructure. And somewhere in that tightening, I had lost the ability to breathe. The breaking point didn't arrive with shouting or drama. It arrived with a conference room, a stack of papers, and a silence so deliberate it felt rehearsed. The morning of the will meeting, I walked into Harper and Doyle Legal straight from a 14-hour shift. My scrubs still smelled like antiseptic. My fingers still held the faint tremor of dispensing meds for half the city. I was exhausted, but they didn't notice. They never did. My parents were already seated at the long oak table. Lez sat hijid, hands clasped like she was posing for a portrait. My father, Raymond, stared out the window, jaw working in that silent, anxious way he had whenever he knew he was about to do something cowardly. And Noah lounged in his chair like he was waiting for a dinner reservation. Not a legal proceeding. He didn't look nervous. That should have been my first clue. The attorney, Mr. Alden, cleared his throat, a small, apologetic sound, like he was bracing for impact. Your parents asked me to update their living trust, he said, sliding a thick document closer, given Noah's upcoming marriage. I nodded. It made sense. Noah was soon to be a father, and I assumed this was about securing something for the baby, maybe organizing the tangled finances they always danced around. But then Mr. Alden kept reading. The primary residence at 19 Fletcher Ridge, he said, along with all associated assets investment accounts. Personal valuables will transfer to the sole ownership of Noah Bennett upon the passing of Raymond and Elise. I felt my brain lag behind the words, like my mind couldn't download what he just said. I'm sorry. I managed. Could you repeat that? The house and primary assets. He repeated quickly. We'll go to Noah. I looked at my parents. Elise kept her eyes on the table. Raymond swallowed hard. Noah smirked. And in that smirk, I understood. He had known. For months. Maybe longer. What about me? I asked. My voice steady, despite the shaking in my hands. Mr. Alden flipped a page. To Ethan Bennett. They leave a commemorative Bible and a written expression of gratitude. A Bible and a thank you note. The room seemed to tilt. I've paid every mortgage payment for 4 years. I said. The refinance down payment me. The emergency roof repair me. Raymond finally met my gaze. His expression wasn't cruel. It was worse. It was logical. Mechanical. The look of someone who had turned a betrayal into a justification. Noah has a family now, he said. He needs stability. He needs a head start. And I don't. You're strong. Ethan, he said softly. You'll be fine. You always are. There it was. The sentence that split something inside me clean in half. You're strong. Therefore, you get nothing. You're capable. Therefore, you don't need support. You're stable. Therefore, you don't deserve investment. My strength had become their excuse to erase me. I stood. My legs felt foreign. But my voice came out like steel. I see. I said. Then we're done here. Don't be dramatic. Elise snapped, finally looking up. It's just paperwork, we're still a family. I stopped at the door. No, I said. You're a family. I'm an employee you fired. I walked out into the blinding afternoon sun. The betrayal settling in my chest like wet cement. I got into my old car. The engine coughing its familiar protest. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilt, or duty, or fear. I felt a clean, slicing clarity. They hadn't made a mistake. They had made a choice. And so would I. When I got home from the lawyer's office, my apartment felt different. Same sagging couch. Same flickering kitchen light. The same stack of unopened mail on the counter, but something in the air had shifted. It was as if the betrayal had vacuum-sealed the space, leaving only clarity behind. I didn't rage. I didn't cry. I didn't even pace. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and logged into my bank account with the calm of a man reviewing someone else's life. The familiar number loaded on the screen: $1. Woo buy. Scheduled to be withdrawn in 3 days. The payment I had been sending like clockwork for 48 months. The mortgage payment for the house I would never inherit. The house I'd funded more faithfully than its actual owners. My parents' voices echoed in my mind. You're strong. You'll be fine. You always manage. They must have believed those words so deeply that they forgot strength has limits. I clicked on the transaction. Cancel series. A window popped up. Are you sure you want to cancel all recurring payments? Yes. I whispered. It felt like breaking a spell. The payment disappeared from the dashboard. Erased with one digital command, yet the weight it lifted was physical. Seismic. A chain snapping link by link. For the next 30 days, I waited not for an apology, but for data. If my parents reached out simply because they missed me, that would mean something. If the silence continued, that would mean everything. The silence continued. Not a text. Not a call. Not a single "how are you?" They didn't want a son. They wanted a service. And when that service stopped, the outage was finally noticed. Adam sprzecha chinzechi shi unupia. M. On the 1st of the month, my phone lit up with the now infamous text. Mortgage is due. Transfer the money. Not "are you okay?" Not "we need to talk." Just a bill collector doing her rounds. My reply took 4 seconds. Forward the bill to the owner. That isn't me. Their reaction was instant and hysterical calls. Threats. Guilt-laced voicemails. Noah texted like a man losing access to his golden parachute. But I didn't answer. I didn't engage. I didn't owe them a debate. What I did owe myself was truth. So that night, I opened the county clerk's website and looked up the property records for the house I had been financially propping up for years. The results landed like a punch. A. 450. 000 cash out refinance. 14 months earlier, they had drained the equity of the house, the very house they gifted to Noah in the will, and used the money to bail out his failures. My payments for the last year hadn't built anything. They had kept the sinking ship barely above water. My parents had shoved an anchor into my hands and called it responsibility. For the first time, I laughed. Not out of humor, out of revelation. The house wasn't an inheritance. It was a time bomb. And by cutting me off, they had unknowingly placed the detonator in Noah's hands. The next morning, the banging on my apartment door started at dawn. I didn't rush. Power shift slowly. Then all at once, I opened the door only 3 inches. Chain still in place. Elise and Noah stood there, anxiety and rage personified. Elise wrung her hands. Ethan, we need to talk. The bank is threatening to accelerate the loan. I know, I said calmly. It happens when you miss a payment. You can't do this. Noah snapped. You're going to ruin everything. That house is my future. No, I said, sliding 2 documents through the gap. This is your future. The first was a spreadsheet every dollar I'd sent them, totaling over $52. Bye-bye. The second was the deed of trust, showing the $450. 000 refinance. Elise's face drained of color. Noah's turned blotchy with panic. You didn't give him a house. I said. You gave him a debt he can't pay. And I'm done subsidizing the consequences of your choices. Noah swallowed. If you don't help, if you don't fix this, they'll foreclose. Then sell the watch. I said, nodding at our father's vintage Omega on his wrist. Start there. Their silence was the purest sound I had ever heard. I closed the door, not slammed. Just closed and locked the deadbolt with a click that felt like the end of a chapter. Inside my apartment, the morning sun stretched across the floor. This was what freedom looked like: quiet, steady, earned. Not vengeance born of anger, but justice born of boundaries. Not violence, but truth. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't holding up anyone else's world, just my own. 3 months passed like the slow tightening of a vise. My phone stayed mostly silent, small. Frantic spikes of contact, followed by long stretches of nothing. Every week, I heard whispers through extended family the bank was sending notices. Noah was unraveling. My parents were scrambling. I kept my distance, not out of cruelty, but out of survival. Then one morning, an email arrived. Subject mandatory meeting, loan resolution. It was from a representative at Northwood Financial Services, the bank holding the mortgage for my parents' house. The message was polite, professional, and chillingly direct. The situation had escalated. All involved parties were required to appear at a meeting to discuss foreclosure alternatives. Attached was a list of required attendees. My name was on it, not as an owner, not as a co-signer, but because my parents claimed I was financially responsible for the property as part of a family agreement. They lied, legally, in writing. That was the moment something inside me didn't break, it detonated. I forwarded the email to the one person who was always in my corner, Attorney Marcus Hale, a former colleague of my grandfather and someone who had known me since childhood. Marcus responded within 10 minutes. "Ethan, I'll be there. Don't speak until I tell you to." So I went. The meeting took place in a glass-walled conference room on the 27th floor of a downtown building, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seattle's skyline. The kind of view you'd appreciate if you weren't about to watch your family implode. My parents arrived first. Elise looked smaller than I remembered, hair unbrushed, eyes red, clothes wrinkled. Raymond looked older, stiff, his shoulders caved inward. And Noah walked in like the victim of the century, frazzled, defensive, angry before the meeting even began. He still wore our father's vintage Omega. Of course he did. I didn't greet them. They didn't greet me. The air was glacial. The bank representative, Ms. Alvarez, who began with a laminated folder and the kind of professional sympathy that meant she'd seen this scenario 100 times. "We're here to discuss the serious delinquency on the loan for 19 Fletcher Ridge," she said. "This meeting will determine whether foreclosure can be avoided." Noah leaned forward. "We only missed a payment because my brother decided to stop contributing. He sabotaged us." Marcus gave a quiet, dangerous laugh. I didn't speak. I didn't flinch. I just watched the panic simmer under Noah's skin. Ms. Alvarez shuffled her papers. "According to what was submitted, the family's claim is that Ethan has been the primary payer on the mortgage for several years. Is that correct?" My parents nodded before I could answer. Marcus raised a hand. "Before my client responds, may I introduce Exhibit A?" He slid a folder onto the table with tactical precision. "If you review the documentation inside," he continued, "you'll find something interesting. Ethan Bennett was not a co-owner, not a co-signer, and not a designated financial contributor. He was simply transferring money to his parents voluntarily. There was no legal obligation." He tapped the folder. "However, included in Exhibit A is the deed of trust from 14 months ago showing a $450,000 cash-out refinance that Mr. Haymond and Mrs. Bennett orchestrated without informing my client, despite the fact that he was funding the payments. They stripped the equity down to the studs while making him believe he was investing in a family asset." Ms. Alvarez's eyes widened. She wasn't expecting that curveball. Raymond cleared his throat. "We had to." "Noah." Marcus held up a second page. "And here," he said, "we have documentation of transfers from Ethan totaling $52,800 over 4 years. Money he thought was preserving a home. In reality, it was servicing interest on a drain property used to patch financial holes created by Noah Bennett." Noah slammed his fist on the table. "This is bullshit. It's math." Marcus replied calmly, "And math doesn't lie." Elise finally broke. "You don't understand," she said to the bank rep, wiping her eyes. "We were trying to protect both our sons. Noah needed help. Ethan always manages." There it was again, the anthem of my childhood. Ms. Alvarez clasped her hands. "Mrs. Bennett, whether your son manages or not, the legal responsibility lies with the borrowers, you and Mr. Bennett." Raymond's composure cracked. "So what happens now? You're just going to take the house?" "That depends," Ms. Alvarez said, looking directly at Noah, "on your ability to meet the outstanding balance. The current debt exceeds the home's market value. Foreclosure is the most likely outcome." Noah's face twisted with rage and disbelief. "This is your fault," he hissed at me. "If you hadn't stopped paying." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "If he hadn't stopped paying, the bank would still be unaware of the hidden refinance, and Noah would still be benefiting from a fraudulent arrangement. Don't confuse a stopped transfer with a detonated truth." Silence settled over the room like ash. Then Miss Alvarez asked the question that sealed everything. "Mr. Bennett," she said to Noah, "do you have any means to take over the mortgage?" Noah opened his mouth, closed it, looked at our parents, opened it again. No. It wasn't an answer. It was a confession. Ms. Alvarez closed the folder gently, the universal symbol for "there's nothing left to discuss." "In that case," she said, "foreclosure proceedings will begin." Raymond looked devastated. Elise looked hollowed out. Noah looked like someone had ripped the ground from beneath him. I felt nothing. Or rather, I felt something unfamiliar. "Peace." Marcus leaned toward me. "If you'd like to make a statement," he murmured. "Now's the time." I stood. Not for them. For me. My participation in this family has always been voluntary. I said calmly, "But my absence is now mandatory. I'm done being the foundation for a house built on my exhaustion." I looked directly at my parents, not with anger, but with clarity. "I hope you figure things out, but you'll do it without me." Noah muttered something, but Elise's hand shot out to quiet him, a gesture, both desperate and too late. I turned to leave, and for a moment, my father whispered my name. "Ethan." I paused. He searched my face for something: fear, guilt, obligation, but I had none left to give. "Take care of yourself," I said simply. Then I walked out of the glass room, down the polished hallway, and into the elevator. As the doors closed, I felt it, the final severing of a life I had carried longer than my own. Not revenge, not triumph, just freedom. The foreclosure happened quietly, no explosions. No dramatic final showdown. Just a legal notice, a lock change, and a for sale sign staked into soil that had once pretended to be home. I didn't drive by. I didn't need to. The chapter had already closed long before the bank reclaimed the keys. My parents moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment near the airport. The walls were thin, the traffic loud, the view non-existent. But for the first time in decades, they were living within the boundaries of their own choices, not mine. Noah bounced between temporary fixes, crashing with his fiancée's family, picking up odd jobs, posting motivational quotes online like a man trying to rebrand failure into philosophy. Without the house and without my income, he was finally forced to face the reality he had been cushioned from his whole life. It wasn't punishment. It was the natural consequence of gravity returning to where it belonged. As for me, I bought a small cedar-sided home on the north edge of the city, a place with more quiet than I knew what to do with. The first night I slept there, I kept expecting my phone to buzz, to yank me back into crisis mode. It didn't. The silence was full, not empty. I planted lavender in the backyard. I learned how to cook properly for the first time. I started waking up without pressure on my chest, without the sense that my day belonged to everyone but me. I stopped being the safety net for people who never learned to stand. And slowly, the truth settled in. Freedom doesn't always feel victorious. Sometimes it just feels honest. I didn't need their apology anymore. I didn't need validation. I didn't need closure from the people who never offered it freely. I finally understood what my grandfather meant when he once told me, "Strength isn't about carrying others. It's about knowing when to set something down." So I set them down. And for the first time in my life, my hands were free. If you're still here, thank you for listening to the end of my story. And if any part of this felt familiar, if you've ever carried a family on your back, or built your life around people who only noticed the weight you lifted, then I hope you know this: you're not alone. And you deserve a life that belongs to you. If you want more stories like this, hit subscribe, drop a comment, and let me know what part resonated most. Your experiences matter here. Your voice matters here. And I genuinely love to hear your story too. This story was created purely for entertainment and narrative purposes. Names, characters, places, and incidents are fictional or used in a fictionalized manner. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is entirely coincidental. Nothing in this content should be interpreted as legal, financial, or psychological advice. Please do not attempt to replicate any actions, decisions, or behaviors described in this story in real life. The creators and publishers of this content assume no responsibility for consequences arising from interpretations or misuse. This is storytelling, nothing more, nothing less.